The quiet of the Cypress Grove community was a carefully manufactured illusion, a veneer of manicured lawns and identical beige mailboxes that hid a slow, deliberate bleeding of its financial lifeblood. It began not with a bang but with a whisper, a nagging unease that settled over the community like the humid Florida air. For residents like Mark and Alina Rodriguez, the first sign was subtle. The communal pool, the crown jewel of Cypress Grove, developed a persistent green tint, the filter pumps coughing and sputtering into silence. The elegant street lamps that lined the pristine sidewalks flickered and died, one by one, plunging the nightly dogwalkers into pockets of deep shadow. Work orders piled up, and the cheerful boilerplate emails from the HOA Management Company, Community Perfection Inc., began to sound increasingly hollow, full of excuses about supply chain issues and delayed contractors. The president of the volunteer HOA board, a retired accountant named Arthur Finch, found his calls to the community manager, a impeccably dressed and perpetually reassuring man named David Sterling, going straight to voicemail with an unsettling frequency. Sterling, who had been hired for his polished demeanor and seemingly encyclopedic knowledge of Florida HOA law, was becoming a ghost. David Sterling was the picture of suburban success. He drove a new Lexus, always freshly washed. He wore tailored suits to board meetings, his salt and pepper hair always perfectly in place. He spoke in a calm, measured baritone that exuded competence, effortlessly batting away concerns with phrases like capital reserve studies and long-term depreciation schedules. He was a master of the spreadsheet, a wizard who could make daunting columns of numbers dance to his tune. The board, comprised of well-meaning but overwhelmed residents like Arthur, trusted him implicitly. He was the professional, after all. They signed the checks he put in front of them, their faith in his expertise a shield against the tedious complexity of multi-million-dollar budgets. But Arthur Finch's accountant brain, though retired, never fully switched off. The unease curdled into suspicion during a meeting about repaving the community's aging tennis courts. The quote from the contractor was astronomical. "It's the cost of materials," Arthur Sterling had said, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless sympathy. "It's a terrible time for asphalt." Later that night, Arthur was reviewing the meeting minutes when a dissonant note echoed in his memory. He recalled a conversation months prior with a neighbor who worked in construction, who'd mentioned a recent drop in asphalt prices. It was a small thing, a pebble of doubt, but it was enough. The next morning, Arthur went to the HOA's online portal, a system Sterling himself had implemented. He requested access to the full, detailed financial records. The response was a masterclass in obfuscation. First, there was a delay. Then, a password issue. Finally, Sterling provided a heavily redacted summarized PDF that revealed nothing. "The full files are a proprietary format on our secure server," Sterling explained over the phone, his voice still calm, but with a new, thin layer of ice. "It's for security, you understand." Arthur did not understand. He called an emergency, closed-door session of the board. Around a kitchen table littered with coffee mugs and printed emails, he laid out his fears. Alina Rodriguez was there, her frustration boiling over. "My kids can't swim in that swamp he calls a pool, and our quarterly fees just went up 20%, she exclaimed. Another board member, a young software engineer named Ben Carter, remained skeptical. "David's been great. This is just a rough patch. You're seeing ghosts." Arthur, but the seed was planted. The board, now divided, passed a motion against Sterling's vehement protests to temporarily shift signatory authority, requiring 2 board members to co-sign any expenditure over $5,000. It was a first, tentative step toward reclaiming control. The following week, the illusion shattered. A bank statement, which Sterling had failed to intercept, arrived by old-fashioned mail at the community clubhouse. It was for a secondary operating account Arthur didn't even know existed. The transactions were a sledgehammer to their reality. There were wire transfers to luxury car dealerships in Miami, dozens of charges for 5-star hotels in the Caribbean, payments to high-end jewelers, and a staggering series of withdrawals to a casino in Tampa. The account, funded entirely by the monthly dues of the hard-working families of Cypress Grove, was nearly empty. The air left the room. The meticulously maintained facade of Cypress Grove crumbled, revealing a foundation of pure deceit. The board, now united in horror, immediately fired David Sterling and called the police. The investigation that followed was a dizzying plunge into a life of audacious fraud. Detective Maria Flores, a veteran of the Economic Crimes Unit, took the case. She was a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a deep-seated loathing for those who preyed on trust. Her team descended upon the offices of Community Perfection Inc., only to find a near-empty shell, single desk, a computer wiped clean, and filing cabinets filled with nothing but dummy invoices and forged vendor contracts. The forensic accounting trail was a spiderweb of deceit. Sterling had created a labyrinth of fake companies with names similar to legitimate contractors. Green Thumb Landscaping became Green Thumb Landscapers, with invoices for thousands of dollars for tree trimming that never happened. A payment of $45,000 to a one paving and resurfacing for drainage work was actually a down payment on his Lexus. He had exploited the trust and financial illiteracy of the board, presenting them with summarized reports that hid the movement of money to his dozens of shell accounts. He used the HOA's credit cards for everything from his mortgage payments to his daughter's extravagant wedding reception, itemizing it all as community outreach events or vendor liaison expenses. The $754,000 wasn't just stolen, it was flaunted. Social media, which Detective Flores scoured, showed a man living a life far beyond his means, posing on yachts, wearing Rolexes, vacationing in Bora Bora while the community he was paid to serve watched their property values decay along with their infrastructure. The manhunt was brief. David Sterling wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a con artist who never expected anyone to look too closely. He was arrested at an airport hotel trying to book a one-way flight to Belize with a suitcase full of cash and his passport. The cinematic climax the residents might have imagined a dramatic chase, a tearful confession, was instead a quiet, bureaucratic procedure. He was apprehended without incident, the illusion of the successful businessman finally and completely broken. In the aftermath, the community of Cypress Grove was left with a devastating hangover. The embezzled funds were mostly gone, spent on ephemeral luxuries. The HOA was forced to levy a massive special assessment on every homeowner, a bitter pill to swallow, a second bill for the crime committed against them. The Rodriguezes had to dip into their children's college fund to pay the $15,000 emergency fee. The pool was finally repaired, the lights replaced, but every flicker of a bulb, every fallen palm frond, now served as a painful reminder of the betrayal. David Sterling pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and grand theft, accepting a plea deal that would see him serve 12 years in a state penitentiary. At his sentencing, Arthur Finch delivered a victim impact statement, his voice steady but filled with a profound weariness. He spoke not of the money, but of the trust that had been stolen, the social fabric of their neighborhood torn apart by suspicion and debt. Sterling, stripped of his suit, looked small and ordinary. He offered a meek apology, claiming a gambling addiction had spiraled out of control, but the words rang hollow. The true legacy of David Sterling's crime is not just the repaired pavement or the refilled coffers, which will take years to rebuild. It is the pervasive sense of vigilance that has hardened into paranoia. Board meetings, once sparsely attended, are now standing room-only events, with residents scrutinizing every line item, questioning every decision. The new management company operates under a microscope, its every move documented and challenged. The beautiful manicured streets of Cypress Grove are quiet once more, but the silence is different now. It is the silence of a community that has learned a brutal lesson, that the greatest threats are not always from the outside, but can come from the well-dressed, soft-spoken man in the boardroom, holding the keys to the kingdom and a spreadsheet full of beautiful, devastating lies. Human Tayok